B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, July 26, 2018. Have you heard? Your humble host is leaving on vacation. We'll have a podcast for you Friday and Monday, and then we'll resume sometime in mid to late August. The PBC show's technical director, Raul Velez, was here today as we finalize plans to remodel the secret studio and add some new bells and whistles and gizmos. It's going to be exciting. And, well, we're looking forward to all of it. So yesterday, I led the podcast with a plea to my old friend Nancy Pelosi. Can you please cast off the polling, the political strategy, and allow impeachment process to begin? And as if someone in Washington is listening to Peter B. Collins, there was an announcement last night about impeachment. My ears perked up. Then I heard, oh, it's coming from the wrong people. And then I learned, oh, it's aimed at the wrong guy. So, a group of extremists, the true radicals in the House of Representatives, the so-called Freedom Caucus, led by Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan, announced that they are filing articles of impeachment against the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. It's part of their ongoing effort to try to derail the Mueller investigation. And since they can't get Jeff Sessions, because he recused himself, kinda, and that, of course, continues to enrage the Trumpster, well, these people are certainly doing Trump's bidding as they undermine Mueller by attacking Rosenstein and claiming that he has failed to honor their demands to share sensitive information from the Mueller investigation as part of their oversight responsibilities. And, of course, their idea of oversight is to grab the information and overturn the Mueller investigation. And Rosenstein is not that stupid. Now, he's the guy who was burned by Trump. Trump ordered him to write the memo justifying the sacking of FBI Director St. James Comey. Rosenstein did. He stayed up late and turned it around in less than 24 hours. Trump used it to fire Comey and then said, well, that wasn't really the reason. You know, that's just to paper the file with. And shortly thereafter, because Sessions had recused, Rosenstein used that authority to appoint Mueller as the special counsel. And that's why they're after him. Now, on the face of it, Jim Jordan says the Department of Justice is keeping information from Congress. Enough is enough. It's time to hold Rosenstein accountable for blocking Congress's constitutional oversight role. Then Mark Meadows added, the stonewalling over the last year has been just as bad or worse than under the Obama administration. Multiple times we've caught DOJ officials hiding information from Congress, withholding relevant documents, or even outright ignoring congressional subpoenas. Now, the leaders of the Republican Party, including Speaker Paul Ryan, say that they do not support this move. Ryan expressed sympathy for the frustration voiced by his colleagues, but he said he'd seen nothing that rises to the standard of impeachment. I don't think we should be cavalier, he said. I don't think this rises to high crimes and misdemeanors. And he also said that practically it would tie up both the House and Senate in knots. It would delay other agenda items. It might delay the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And, well, you can see that this is simply a little dramatic turn. This was announced on the day that Congress is adjourning for 5 weeks. There will be no action on this impeachment resolution. There are a total of 9 additional co-sponsors beyond Meadows and Jordan. But even Lindsey Graham, Republican in the Senate, says no, he doesn't support this impeachment. I don't think he should be impeached, he said, referring to Rosenstein. Republicans are also steamed because Rosenstein is one of 4 people who signed off on the applications to the FISA court for a warrant against Carter Page. But he wasn't the first to do that. And this just shows how highly political these radical Republicans are. And Jim Jordan, who is embroiled in a scandal, he was an assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University, and the team doctor has been accused of fondling the men who came to him for inspections or medical treatment. And I do not presume to know what really happened, but there are so many people who've come forward saying that they were present when these issues were discussed in the locker room while Jordan was present. But Jordan denies completely. He never witnessed, heard, knew about it. End of story. Well, maybe it is the end of the story, but our experience at Michigan State, at Penn State, is that when people come forward after years of keeping silent, they're usually telling the truth. So Jim Jordan, despite all that, despite the impeachment drama that he participated in yesterday, he has launched a long-shot bid to become Republican Speaker of the House. He says he's the real foot soldier for Trump, and I guess the impeachment articles are part of that package. Now he's up against the highly inarticulate Kevin McCarthy, who is next in line. He's a Republican from the Bakersfield area of California. And Steve Scalise, the Republican from Louisiana who recovered from the gunshot wounds at the softball game last year, he and McCarthy are also in the hunt to become the next speaker. And, of course, the Republicans have to retain control of the House of Representatives, which I think is likely, but they have some work to do. And speaking of speakers, Nancy Pelosi wants to be the next speaker, and she's willing to allow Democratic challengers to use her as a punching bag if that's what it takes to get a Democratic majority. And one of the examples is a guy named Danny O'Connor, who is running in a red district in Ohio. And he says he's made a centerpiece of his campaign that he has promised not to support Pelosi for another term as Democratic leader. But then he got on with the interrupter, Chris Matthews, on his hardball show on MSDNC. And Matthews kept pressing him with a series of hypotheticals. And finally, O'Connor just kind of said, well, we need a change in leadership on both sides, and that he would vote for whoever the Democratic Party puts forward, not a Republican. So the opponents have turned this into a hit TV spot where they're claiming that he's a dishonest Danny O'Connor. But this highlights the difficulties that Democrats face. And their leadership is deeply unpopular in many parts of the country. And rather than make room for a new generation, Nancy Pelosi clings to power. And our loyal listener in the Netherlands, Willem Gruters, wrote, he's somewhat formal, he says, Mr. Collins, did Nancy Pelosi have a stroke or something? Because when I hear her speaking, it appears her speech is not too clear. It seems she has difficulty speaking clearly. I hear a slur in her voice when she speaks. Is that the right term in English, he asks, and yes. And let me say this diplomatically. Nancy Pelosi is not the greatest public speaker. And when I worked on her campaign back in 1996, we shot a half-hour TV show. And it wasn't easy. She didn't like cue cards. She tried to ad-lib it, and we had to go to a teleprompter in order to get her through it all. And when she speaks off the cuff, she often interrupts herself, doesn't complete a sentence, appears to be stammering. But to your point, I'm not aware of any medical issues that she has recently encountered, Willem. He also asked, several sources say there's going to be a blue wave. How credible is this information? The Young Turks brought some tidbits of this news. And I didn't get to watch that video yet, Willem. But my sense is that the blue wave is a marketing scheme. It's a way to try to get Democrats to turn out at the polls this November. And it is technically possible. But the impediments to the blue wave are gerrymandering and the dominance that Republicans have in many parts of the country. After all, polls show that despite the blistering attacks on Trump for his performance in Helsinki with Putin, 88% of his Republican base continue to support him. And Willem says that the Young Turks referred to Republican pollster Frank Luntz, who was saying this is not a wave but a tsunami. Well, Luntz is a guy who is often using tactics. And I believe that he says that to try to keep the Republicans engaged and to keep them from defecting from Trump and from his lesser imitators. So, Willem, thank you for your note from the Netherlands today. Always good to hear from you. So, yesterday, the president of the European Union, Jean-Claude Juncker, came to the White House to talk trade with Trump. And it appears they made some common ground. They've agreed to delay the automobile tariffs that Trump was threatening, the 25% on imports to the U.S. They've agreed to work towards zero tariffs and zero subsidies. And it was a bunch of happy talk in the Rose Garden. And Trump said it was a very big day for free and fair trade, vowed to resolve the steel and aluminum tariff issues, and we will resolve retaliatory tariffs. So this is a photo op of Trump trying to show that his threatening behavior pays off, and that these nations and, units of nations like the EU will come crawling to Trump to try to make a deal. And even if he's right, they're going to be so pissed off forever that they're going to work the loopholes and the margins to get even. And, for example, Trump extracted an agreement that Europe will accept liquefied natural gas from the United States. Well, we don't actually have the facilities to export natural gas, at least not to my knowledge. We don't have the double-line tankers, the double-hulled tankers, and this is an effort to try to compete with Russia in delivering energy to Europe. But I think they're just words. I don't see any real commitment there. And according to the speculators who get paid to do it at the Washington Post, Trump is responding to pleas from Republican congressional leaders. He is backing off on three top priorities: the trade war, the threat to shut down the federal government if the border wall isn't fully funded by October 1st, and that the Putin visit that was announced last week for this fall has been delayed to a nonspecific date in 2019. Now, with Trump, you can never expect that a moment of restraint will last any longer than just a moment. Because Twitter. And because he has impulse control, serious impulse control. And so we will see how all this plays out. But I believe he is doing and will continue to do great damage to the U.S. economy and to our ability to engage in international trade. American consumers will pay more, there will be layoffs and other contractions in American manufacturing and the economy at large. That is my prediction. And John Kasich, one of the few Republicans who's willing to publicly confront Trump, he talked about the $12 billion in emergency aid they're giving to farmers in red states to try to get past the midterm election and the damage that Trump has caused to agriculture. And Kasich said about these $12 billion in giveaways, you have to wonder, is this about vote buying? Is this about the fact that you don't want farmers turning against you in a midterm when they're suffering the consequences of trade? And the Post backs up its speculation with some recent polling. For example, in Michigan, only 28% of registered voters believe Trump deserves a second term. 62% say it's time for someone else. In Minnesota, 30% say Trump gets a second term. 60% want somebody else. In Wisconsin, 31% support re-election of the Trumpster. 63% say, please, somebody else. So despite the 88% support of from his Republican base, specific to Russia and Putin and all that, there are vulnerabilities that are showing up in the polling. We're just going to have to see if those vulnerabilities widen enough to benefit the Democrats. There's some new leaks from Washington, and they may be coming from Robert Mueller's special counsel team, or maybe from Trump lawyers. But what we're being told is that Mueller is scrutinizing the president's tweets and his public negative comments about Jefferson Beauregard Jim Crow Sessions III and the former FBI Director Comey. The leakers are not identified. They're described as three people briefed on the matter. And these remarks come as Trump has been privately pressuring Sessions and Comey about the investigation, and Mueller is examining whether the actions add up to attempts to obstruct the investigation by intimidating witnesses and pressuring senior law enforcement officials to limit the inquiry. And privately, some of the lawyers have expressed concern that Mueller will stitch together several episodes, encounters, and pieces of evidence, including tweets, to build a case that Trump embarked on a broad effort to interfere with the investigation. I think that's pretty clear. I don't think we need leaks to establish that. And so we'll see if the president's self-inflicted tweets may lead to his ultimate, some end of his political career. It's hard to figure out how that may come or when. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Siri. No, not that lady on my phone, Siri Walgren. She kicks in $5 a month. Also want to thank Paul Karsh, Marvin Rasmussen, and Ed Lowe just renewed his annual subscription. I'm grateful to each of you for your support, and I invite others to join in. I need your help to continue, and we've got the remodeling here at the Secret Studio. My partners from the Canal Welcome Center are certainly carrying the lion's share of that, but I need your help to continue the program. So join me at peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, click on it, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. You can choose a PayPal subscription, $5, $10, $20 a month. The $50 annual subscription earns you a copy of John Dist's new rock and roll CD called American University. I'd love to send it to you with your new annual subscription. And if you're allergic to PayPal, yo comprende. You can communicate with me by the U.S. Post at Box 150-660. San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150-660, San Rafael, 94915. Oh, and I just got a renewal. I was at the P.O. Box yesterday from Linda Lewis, who has relocated to Texas. Thank you, Linda. I certainly appreciate your support. So Trump used Twitter, this time to send threats to Turkey. And they're not quite as threatening of war. They're not quite as bellicose as the all-caps message to Tehran last Sunday night. But Trump is threatening to slap large sanctions on Turkey unless the strongman Erdogan frees an American pastor whose detention has strained relations between the U.S. and Turkey. The American's name is Andrew Brunson. Trump tweets, quote, the U.S. will impose large sanctions on Turkey for their longtime detainment of Pastor Andrew Brunson, a great Christian, family man, and wonderful human being. He is suffering greatly. This innocent man of faith should be released immediately. I mean, the hypocrisy in there just pours out of it. Anyway, this guy's from North Carolina. He's been working in Turkey for more than 20 years. He's been accused of being a part of the Gulen movement, and Erdogan says they were behind the failed military coup in 2016 that led to this massive crackdown, 75,000 people who lost their, about 75,000 people were locked up, and another 100,000 or more lost their jobs simply because they were accused of being part of this, expansive network that allegedly supports Gulen. And he's the imam, billionaire, lives in Pennsylvania in self-imposed exile, clearly gets protection from the United States. And I wonder if there isn't a swap underway where Trump would earn a big payday for his old buddy Mike Flynn. Because as you know, Mike Flynn was on the payroll of a company in support of the state of Turkey while he was advising the president during the campaign. That's a real conflict of interest. He didn't report as a foreign agent, and one of the schemes Flynn is accused of was trying to kidnap Fethullah Gulen and return him to Turkey with a $15 million payoff. That's what Flynn proposed. So, given what Trump was willing to do in making a deal with Putin, maybe that's what'll happen here with Gulen and this American named Brunson. Last week, I gave some coverage to this new law that was rammed through the Knesset in Israel. We call it an apartheid law. And by the way, the dictator of Turkey, Erdogan, blasted Israel over this last year for their deep departure from democracy, because, of course, it takes one to know one. And there's a great op-ed that I've linked to in the show file for today's podcast. It appears at the New York Times under the signature of Omri Bohm, described as an Israeli philosopher. And he really nails the issue. He talks about the history of the Jewish state, and that the foundational twin pledge to be both Jewish and democratic was hypocritical. In 1948, the intention was that Arabs would be equal in rights so long as Jews were superior in numbers. And he writes, of the more than 8.2 million people living in Israel's recognized borders today, 73% are Jewish, 20% Arab. But of the almost 12 million people who live in Israel and the West Bank, roughly 56% are Jewish and 40% are Arab. And as the prospect of a viable two-state solution has receded, so has Israel's promise that it would provide full equality to non-Jews. He says defending the state's Jewishness in the manner of this legislation runs roughshod over people's equal right to democratic representation. It implies that Israel's Jewish identity trumps its democratic character. Last month, the Joint List, I'm continuing to quote here, an alliance of mostly Arab-Israeli lawmakers, submitted to Parliament a bill called Basic Law, the State of All Its Citizens, that proposed redefining Israel from a Jewish state to a neutral republic. The Knesset didn't even vote on it, invoking a procedural rule to dismiss it outright as denying the country's Jewishness. He says the cruel results of this strategy are well known from Israel's settlement project in the West Bank. To set up these villages, the government confiscated the land of Arab Israelis and isolated their towns from one another. Their economic prospects waned. Their national aspirations, such as for autonomy within Israel, were undermined. Last week's law will give these old methods a fresh boost, including before the Supreme Court, where they've been challenged in the past. And this policy has created a de facto apartheid in the occupied territories of the West Bank. What was long suspected has finally been made brutally clear. Israel cannot be both a Jewish state and a liberal democracy. And he's right, and that's why I refer to Israel as a theocracy. I think that is accurate. In Pakistan, the former international cricket star Imran Khan is declaring victory in the general election, and he took pains to describe it as the fairest election in Pakistan's history. He didn't say it was fair. He didn't say it was free of any gamesmanship, but he is being attacked by the opposition party of Sharif, and that's Nawaz Sharif, who is currently rotting in jail under corruption charges. Khan has staunchly denied allegations by the other party that he's getting help from the military, and the army dismisses allegations of meddling. But of course, the army allows democracy to operate intermittently in Pakistan. Who knows when they will retake control? A bloody day in Syria. Is it the final stages of the civil war there and the effort to vanquish the Islamic State? 4 suicide bombers entered the city of Sweda, which is near the border of Jordan and has been really spared most of the violence during the civil war. And the 4 suicide bombers conducted quite a bit of carnage. 38 people were killed. And against that backdrop, there is a feverish effort to get the white helmets out of Syria. And this helps underscore the skepticism that many of us have had about the role of the white helmets, the support that they've gotten from the U.S. and Britain, their proximity to many of the questionable claims of the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian war. And many reporters on the scene flatly connect them to the terrorist groups, the so-called terrorist groups, including al-Nusra Front. Several years ago on this podcast, we aired out the concerns of members of the American Psychological Association and about the APA's role in torture at Guantanamo and elsewhere. And after quite a battle in 2015, they passed a resolution blocking psychologists from working for the military at Guantanamo. And now, at the convention coming up very soon here in San Francisco in August, the APA will study and vote on a new proposal to allow APA members at Guantanamo to work in a healthcare role. And they're tugging on our hearts, saying, you know, the detainees there are not getting treatment that they should be guaranteed under the Geneva Conventions. Well, I'm sorry. That doesn't wash when you consider that psychologists James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen extracted more than $80 million from the Pentagon to devise the torture programs. And there were professional psychologists who were there during some of the most extreme applications of torture on prisoners. And I want to thank my friend Jeff Kay, Dr. Jeff Kay, a retired psychologist, and also single out Stephen Solds. If you Google his name, search for his name at the peterbcollins.com website. It's Soldz. I interviewed him back during that conflict, and he is now the subject of a defamation lawsuit brought by those who want to pass this resolution to allow psychologists to go back to work at Gitmo. Well, each day they trickle out a little more about Maria Butina, the accused red-headed Russian spy. And she's here in the country. She's going to face trial. And this is going to be a big media scrum. There's no doubt about it. But the NRA, the National Rifle Association, has been silent since Butina was arrested. We know she made the direct efforts to make connections with the NRA. She ran a pro-gun rights group in Russia. It's hard to imagine she could do that without approval from top dogs, including Putin. So now we're learning that Svetlana Nikolaeva, who is the head of a gun company that supplies sniper rifles to the Russian military and intelligence services, and she's the wife of an oligarch named Konstantin Nikolaev, she's been the sugar mama for Maria Butina. According to testimony that Butina gave to the Senate Intelligence Committee this April, Mrs. Nikolaev had given her financial support. So we're still waiting to hear from the NRA. They're all out at the range with their earmuffs on. They just don't know anything about all this. Yesterday, a dark day for press freedom. Caitlin Collins, who works for CNN, no relation to yours truly, was acting as the network pool reporter. They were invited into the Oval Office for a photo op and what they call a spray with the European Union Commission president. And as they usually do, as they're being ushered out, Caitlin Collins shouted some questions at the president. And as a result, Bill Shine, who's the new muscle, the White House communications director, he was in charge of dealing with sexual assault cover-ups over at Fox News. And he hauled Caitlin Collins in and said, "You're not invited to this press event we're holding in the Rose Garden this afternoon." And they said that it's because her questions were inappropriate and she shouted. Now, this is obviously punishment for CNN. And I applaud CBS reporter Steve Portnoy who tweeted support for Caitlin Collins. So did Phil Rucker of the Washington Post. So did April Ryan. I can't remember where she works. Maybe USA Today. And even Fox News, Brett Baier. As a member of the White House press pool, Fox stands firmly with CNN on access. Fox News President Jay Wallace released a statement. We stand in strong solidarity with CNN for the right to full access for our journalists. Pretty rare. And speaking of media, one of the top lawyers, the Deputy General Counsel at the New York Times, David McCraw, spoke to a group of judges here on the West Coast this week. And Ray McGovern picked up on it, wrote about it at Consortium News. And McGraw says that the prosecution of Julian Assange would be a very, very bad precedent for publishers. He's sort of in a classic publisher's position, and I think the law would have a very hard time drawing a distinction between the New York Times and WikiLeaks. He went on to say Assange should be afforded the same protections as traditional journalists. And McGovern notes that while these are comforting comments coming from the so-called Gray Ladies legal department, the New York Times didn't cover the lawyer's comments, at least not so far. A memo has surfaced from the State Department about a year ago advising the White House that plans to end the temporary protective status programs for immigrants from El Salvador and Honduras would backfire and significantly boost recruitment for gangs like MS-13 operating in Central America. And as you know, Trump is willfully ignorant about the whole MS-13 story. He ignores that it was Hetcho in Los Angeles. That group grew in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and it's when their members were deported that they started to expand their criminal activities into Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And despite this advice, and even an earnest letter from Rex Tillerson, when Rexon was running the State Department, the White House ignored the advice and ended this status, forcing mass migration back to these countries, which will cause huge unemployment and other social problems and probably will lead to expanded recruitment by gangs. And finally today, Facebook set a new record. It's a record for the largest single drop in a stock share price in a single day. The drop is estimated at 20% or a little bit higher. Over $110 billion in equity was erased from the market value of Facebook. Now, to put this in some perspective, over the last couple of days, I noticed that Facebook stock was jumping by 5%, 7% a day. And this 20% drop, I believe, still leaves the share price higher than it was when Mark Zuckerberg went to testify before Congress just a couple of months ago. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. I hope you will. We post it on YouTube, and I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.